When a man grew up in a psychological horror hellhole of a household, he came to embrace the chaos he experienced. While he appeared to be a normal, even kind and generous specialist on the surface, he was anything but. He was reported for shady dealings involving a wide spectrum of crimes again and again, with the police failing to ever act. This led to the deadliest massacre in Canadian history. Mass shootings have grown more common over the years, and in most of these cases, the killings are contained to one general area and are usually over within minutes, often less than even 10 minutes. It's much less often that someone carries out a massacre that lasts more than a whole day and takes place over multiple towns. So to learn how this all started, let's start at the beginning. Gabriel Wortman was born on July 5, 1968 in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. He was the only son to his parents, Paul and Evelyn, growing up mainly in the Moncton, New Brunswick area. While he did have one brother, he was given up for adoption shortly after his birth. According to many people who knew him throughout his life, Gabriel had been abused for years by his father. It was said that the family's record of violence went back for generations, at least as far back as Gabriel's great-grandfather. Gabriel's great-grandpa was called a tyrant, being described as a man who brutalized his entire family. They felt that something was wrong with him mentally, even in an era where mental illness wasn't too well defined. This sort of treatment was absorbed by and repeated by Gabriel's grandfather, who then internalized it and carried it out on his father, Paul. According to many people within the family and those who lived near them, Paul was well known for abusing his wife, Evelyn. Gabriel grew up witnessing this sort of treatment on a regular basis. Nobody else in the family ever reported it because they were afraid of Paul. The abuse didn't stop at his wife either, as Gabriel was also at the center of much of the mistreatment. Gabriel's uncle Glenn later said, "He never treated him like a little boy, he treated him like an animal." He said that within the family there was, quote, "more than screaming going on." Paul's mistreatment of Gabriel wasn't only cruel, it was outlandish and strange. Most of the abuse wasn't physical. In fact, there's almost nothing to suggest that Paul was ever directly violent towards his son. Most of it was more along the lines of psychological torture, and it started very early on. When Gabriel was only 2.5 years old, his father told him that he didn't need to sleep with his favorite blanket anymore. Rather than just putting it away, he took the blanket and lit it on fire right in front of him. When Gabriel was less than 10 years old, Paul decided that he wasn't capable of caring for his new dog. Rather than give the dog away or even sell it, Paul forced Gabriel to kill the pet himself. He wasn't much older when his father drove him around, ominously implying that he was taking him out to kill him. Gabriel was forced to sit in complete fear, feeling that he was about to be violently murdered, only for his father to drive back home and act as if nothing happened. At one point, Paul did present Gabriel with a gun. However, this time he handed the gun to Gabriel and asked him to shoot him. Obviously, Gabriel refused to murder his own father, so Paul got angry and took the gun back from him. Even to those who didn't know about their family life, Paul was known for being a bit of a miscreant in town. He was a serial petty thief. He would often game the system to avoid paying any money that he could in any situation. One of his cousins even described him as a, quote, career criminal who never got caught. The disrespect towards women, the cold, almost psychopathic violence, and the penchant for financial crime all came to rub off on Gabriel. While he made it no secret that he didn't respect his father at all, he picked up all of his habits regardless. Gabriel was desperate to find some sort of father figure. It was a man named Tom Evans, a man who lived in an apartment near his uncle Glenn, who would come to fill that void in his life. Tom was a lawyer in the area. He was pretty shady in his dealings, and that's putting it lightly. Nevertheless, he and Gabriel came to forge an odd, lopsided friendship. Tom was 19 years older than him, but their friendship was described as profound. While it isn't known if anything ever happened to Gabriel, Tom was known for having a fascination with young boys. He was accused of, and even eventually convicted of, supplying alcohol to minors and even sexually assaulting an underage male. A lot of Tom and Gabriel's friendship would come down to going camping together, drinking, and going out shooting. Several people who knew the both of them have testified that they would even cross the border over into the United States to smuggle alcohol and cigarettes across the border for fun using a sailboat that Tom owned. Gabriel's uncle Glenn knew from the beginning that Tom was bad news. After all, he lived near him. Worried about the influence that the shady lawyer would have on his nephew, he decided to reach out to Gabriel's parents. He told them, "Get Gabriel the hell away from Tom Evans. He'll only get him in trouble." However, some of Tom's other friends said that he was the best friend you could ask for. One of them, named Joe Cartwright, said that he would help him out in ways that nobody else would. He would even hire him for some jobs and paid him generously. Not only that, but he was just a fun guy to hang out with. Being around Tom and Cartwright even came to calm Gabriel's violent nature. Cartwright said, "Tom was like a father to Gabriel. Gabriel wouldn't have been Gabriel without Tom. He molded him into the professional person that he would become, I think. He also molded him in other ways." It was in September of 1987 that Tom Evans came to be arrested for unlawful use of a firearm without reasonable precaution. This was when he and a couple of British soldiers stationed in a nearby base decided to fire off weapons from a boat. Absolutely plastered, they ended up firing straight towards a local Bible camp out on the coast. 97 children had to be evacuated as the bullets hit the ground and the trees around them, sometimes even only coming inches from the kids themselves. Tom and the two others had fired 197 rounds by the time they were finished. For this, Tom was given a 1-year suspended sentence, 1 year of probation, and a firearms ban. Regardless, he didn't get rid of his guns, and nobody made sure he did. Tom also continued in his bad habit of supplying alcohol to young boys. After being found guilty on 4 counts of unlawfully supplying liquor to a minor that same year, he was suspended by the Law Society for a year. However, right after his suspension ended, he went right back into practicing law. Tom's criminal side extended to his job as well. He became fairly well known for defending a Colombian cartel member who had orchestrated a large-scale prison break. His client had been trying to free a few fellow cartel members who had been caught after crashing a cocaine plane operated by the cartel-sponsored Booger Sugar Airlines and crashing it into a field. These cartel members weren't only known for smuggling a whole load of blow, but also weapons and ammunition as well. Tom was able to hear all about their weapons smuggling through the case. However, this law career wouldn't last too much longer. Tom was once again suspended by the Law Society in 1990. This was when he was formally charged for both sexually assaulting an underage boy and supplying him with alcohol. This time he actually saw some jail time, although it was only for 3 months. Before going to jail, he resigned as a lawyer for good. This wasn't out of a sense of guilt, but instead to prevent the Law Society from doing an investigation into him of their own. Gabriel had remained by Tom's side throughout all of this, and he had even been building up a career of his own. While Tom was getting into all of that trouble, Gabriel had actually enrolled in the University of New Brunswick, where he studied psychology. In his yearbook, he stated that he had an interest in becoming a police officer. For whatever reason, however, he never pursued this line of work. His interest in the police would never wane, though. His fascination with the police would become more of a hobby than an actual career aspiration. Instead, Gabriel started off his actual career by becoming a funeral director. Taking a strange turn, though, he got into what would be his career path from then on out, crafting dentures. By the year 2000, Gabriel was dating a woman named Lisa Banfield, the woman that he would remain with for the rest of his life. While the two never got officially married on paper, they acted as if they were a married couple and eventually reached common law spouse status. At one point, Gabriel and Lisa were invited by Gabriel's family to join them on a family trip to Cuba. That trip started out pretty smooth, despite Gabriel's hatred for his father and lack of respect for his mother. Things took a much darker turn when Paul's past abuse of the family came up in conversation. To Gabriel's shock, Paul denied having ever treated the family badly. Outraged at his audacity to make that claim, Gabriel hopped out of his seat and let decades of rage take over him. He beat his father to a bloody pulp until he was completely unconscious. It looked like he might even be dead. Later in the trip, Paul approached Lisa, Gabriel's girlfriend, for a chat. In this talk, he surprisingly admitted to his past mistreatment of his family. He realized the monster that he had created. He told Lisa that Gabriel had picked up his bad habits and gave her a warning, telling her, "I was a bastard to my wife, I was a bastard to my son, and Gabriel's gonna do the same thing to you." Likely due to this incident, Gabriel was referred to a psychologist named Dr. Douglas Maines that year. He ended up seeing him 4 times over a few months. The mental condition he suffered from was listed on his chart as being narcissistic personality disorder. Despite everything going on, Gabriel continued to see financial success. He came to own 3 lots of land in Dartmouth. One of these was his main business, the Atlantic Denture Clinic. He had a second clinic as well in Halifax where he would do much of the same. With his newfound success, Gabriel wanted to help his old friend Tom Evans out in any way that he could. Learning to game the system financially from his father, Gabriel found a sneaky way to get Tom out of some of his financial obligations. Tom had actually owned the apartment where he lived, but it was through his company, called Northumberland Investments Inc., that he started with a business partner. Gabriel decided to buy the whole company out from under that business partner for a solid $100. Now technically owning the apartment, he let Tom live there rent-free in exchange for mundane chores like collecting rent from other occupants, paying the bills, and doing some minor maintenance. Tom, however, was still getting money throughout other avenues. On paper, all he owned was a lease on a campsite, his old boat worth only about $500 at this point, some tools, and an average amount of personal belongings. In his bank account, he was listed as only having $172.78. However, those around him could clearly see that this poor man facade was just that. The man was rolling in cash. His old friend Cartwright saw him pop out a large roll of bills and dish out cash on multiple occasions. Not only that, but a man who owns nothing typically has no need to make secret compartments in his home to stash things away, which Tom made plenty of. One day that they were together, Cartwright asked him why and how he was withdrawing hundreds of thousands of dollars from the bank. Tom shut him down immediately, telling him not to cross that line. He waved his finger and said, "Those are questions that'll get you killed." Gabriel obviously knew that Tom was into some shady dealings, to say the least, and was helping him out. Still, on the surface, he was pretty beloved in the area for his work. Like a movie villain, he hid his true dark nature by engaging in charity and philanthropy. He later appeared in the news for giving free dentures to a cancer survivor. Many of his other patients spoke very highly of him. One of them told the local news that Gabriel was kind enough to come out to his home and make his dentures for him there. This man said, "From what I knew of him, he was quiet, gentle, and very easy to talk to. He was very nice. He kidded around a little bit. He seemed normal." As you may guess, this was all very surface level. Gabriel was creating a smokescreen by engaging in the occasional high-profile act of kindness. Behind the scenes, the police were actually dealing with him somewhat regularly. The first major case against him took place in the fall of 2001. Much like Tom Evans, Gabriel decided to go out and assault a boy. This assault would be in the more traditional sense, the violent way. A 15-year-old boy called only Matthew was waiting for a ride at the bus stop outside of Gabriel's denture clinic one day when a drunken Gabriel stormed out of the office, accusing him of being too close to his property. This was an actual city bus stop, so Matthew was fairly confused. When Matthew explained himself, Gabriel didn't take it very well. He balled up his fist and began pummeling the boy in the head as many times as he could, beating him black and blue. This was when one of Gabriel's friends, still unknown as to who, came around the corner and hit Matthew with a crowbar. Then the two men continued to stomp on his head and all over his body as he laid on the ground. When they were done, they threw Matthew into a newspaper box only minutes before the police arrived. Gabriel was arrested and charged with assault. However, he was let off very easy despite the sheer brutality of it. He was given only 9 months of probation and a $50 fine, being told that, if he met certain conditions during his probation, he would have all the charges wiped from his criminal record afterward. The conditions weren't even too much of an ask. All he had to do was avoid weapons, take an anger management class, and attend a few counseling sessions. Gabriel bought a cottage out in an area called Portapique, where he came to live part-time and even buy up multiple properties. One of these was a building that he called his warehouse, and it was here that he would engage in his main hobby. Gabriel was interested in vehicles, owning and fixing up a bunch of motorcycles. However, his main interest was still the police. He began buying up all sorts of police memorabilia before eventually coming to buy a number of decommissioned police cars as well. His girlfriend Lisa found this odd, as in her experience he didn't seem to like the police that much. She said that he thought that he was better than the police and often looked down on them, despite making a virtual shrine to the cops in his warehouse. It wasn't long before neighbors in the area noticed that Gabriel and Lisa's relationship was anything but sunshine and rainbows. One neighbor said that Gabriel was absolutely obsessed with Lisa and tended to get jealous about all sorts of things with her, even matters that seemed trivial to others. Other neighbors noticed that he bought a whole lot of gasoline and propane tanks. Others described him as paranoid and manipulative. When one questioned him about all of the chemicals that he bought, Gabriel bragged, seemingly jokingly, that he had a lot of lime and muriatic acid to get rid of bodies. He came to get into some legal trouble as well. In 2014, he was involved in a civil lawsuit. This was when he agreed to help out a friend who was in financial trouble. He told the man that he would help him out by becoming the technical owner of his home, much like he had done with Tom Evans. This time, though, he evicted his friend and immediately sold the home for profit. The next lawsuit, though, would be even darker. Even at his business, which he tended to use to portray himself as a good man, Gabriel was anything but that. He was known among the poor community in the area for allowing people to pay for their dentures in other ways. When it came to women with less money, especially older black women in the area, Gabriel would let them pay instead with their bodies. Usually, let's just say that he took advantage of the lack of teeth for his own pleasure. This wasn't really even hidden. In fact, he was said to have been a household name in a lot of black communities in the area. He even encouraged some of them to get their own teeth pulled out so that he could give them a mouthful of much more beautiful teeth with his dentures. Sometimes he would even offer cash to his poor customers, especially the women, in order to refer more people that they knew to his clinic. The Denturist Licensing Board of Nova Scotia ended up receiving at least 8 reports about this behavior. These comments related to everything from sexual comments during treatment to full-on forced sexual acts. He defended himself with the usual line, that being they're all out to get me, or simply by saying that they were all mentally ill. In 2007, after years of operating in this way, Gabriel signed a settlement agreement with the board. Again, he was only ordered to attend counseling. Things went somewhat smoothly for a couple of years. Once again, avoiding any repercussions for his crimes, Gabriel continued to operate his business as if nothing had ever happened. However, in 2009, something would come to devastate him, and it had nothing to do with his misdeeds. It was November. Tom Evans, Cartwright, and another friend had all been partying together. The next day, Tom wouldn't answer their calls. They assumed that Tom had been pretty plastered and let him get some rest. However, when they still couldn't contact him even 3 days later, they decided to go out and check on him. They entered into his apartment and found him lying in his bed, deceased. It was reported that he had died of natural causes. Gabriel was reportedly absolutely devastated when he heard the news. But Gabriel was interested to hear that Tom had left him everything in his will. This included his gun, a Ruger Mini-14 semi-automatic rifle. Gabriel drove out to Dartmouth and rented a dumpster. There he cleared out Tom's apartment himself. Gabriel didn't have a possession and acquisition license, which he would have needed to own the gun. However, under Canadian law, it was allowed to temporarily own guns that one had inherited, being that most of the time it would be an unforeseen acquisition. Even so, Gabriel continued to own the gun without ever going out to get the proper paperwork even long after. That same year, Gabriel came to see a doctor, that being Dr. Forbes. While he had gone for complications due to hypertension, it was noted that he had a history of alcoholism. He promised to try and stop drinking the coming summer for his own health. Dr. Forbes recommended that he see a psychologist as well, but he wasn't interested at all. This would mean that Gabriel's criminal activity wouldn't really change at all. In June of 2010, he was once again investigated by the police. This was after he issued a threat to his parents. He had told his Uncle Glenn clearly, word for word, that he was going to drive out to his parents' home and kill them. While he didn't end up doing it, the police did speak to his parents. Paul told the cops that his son had been stockpiling weapons, saying that he owned Tom's rifle as well as a couple of pistols, all without a license. Paul was right. Little did anyone know, Gabriel really had come to own more guns than just Tom's rifle. He had been acquiring more guns through illegal means. Over time, he came to have 4 guns in his possession. One of these, of course, was Tom's old Ruger Mini-14. Another was a Colt semi-automatic rifle. It was first bought at a gun store in California. This was then purchased by a friend of Gabriel's in the smuggling scene, who later gave it to him. This friend lived in Maine, and was the source of the other guns as well. One of them was a Ruger P89, which this friend loaned to Gabriel, but didn't really give him a time frame on when he should give it back. The last was a Glock 23, which Gabriel actually stole from this friend. When the friend confronted him on it, Gabriel said that he needed it for protection recently. So, feeling bad for his supposed situation, this friend apparently didn't pressure him to give it back. All of those 3 weapons were classified as restricted in Canada, meaning that Gabriel would have required a more specialized license than the simple gun license he already neglected obtaining, that being a restricted firearms license. Not only that, but he would have been required to register the guns themselves as well. It wasn't even only the guns either. Gabriel had also gotten his hands on multiple high-capacity magazines, also highly illegal in Canada. He didn't have much difficulty at all in obtaining any of them, crossing the border with the weapons and magazines each time with no trouble. Even with Gabriel's own father, whose life he had threatened, reporting this gun ownership to the police, he was never caught with them or charged with anything in relation to them. It was only a year after threatening his parents that Gabriel would once again come under the eyes of the police. In May of 2011, they received an anonymous tip that Gabriel had a good stash of guns and that he had been expressing a strong interest in killing a cop. The tipster even filled the police in on about his mental health issues, his recent problems with stress and paranoia, and how he always kept a handgun nearby. This tip was transferred to the Nova Scotia RCMP, but they didn't do anything with it. They gave the case a cursory glance, determined that it was all baseless, and purged the tip from their records entirely, Standard practice when a tip, according to them at least, is baseless. Meanwhile, people in the community felt that Gabriel was a real weirdo. Now and then, he was a very nice neighbor. He'd invite people over to check out the bar he made in his garage with an extensive supply of expensive liquors. Then, on other days, he would be in a drunken rage, lashing out at neighbors, people he hired to work with on his property, or his girlfriend Lisa. One of the neighbors would see his abuse towards Lisa firsthand one day. This was a woman named Brenda Forbes, and Lisa came running over to her home, pounding on the door and saying that Gabriel was going to kill her. Brenda let her in and tried to convince her to just leave him already, but she refused. After she left, Brenda sent a tip in to the RCMP herself. Again, the RCMP did absolutely nothing. Another neighbor also sent a tip into the RCMP in the summer of 2013, when Gabriel once again assaulted Lisa and admitted to having a stock of illegal guns. The RCMP, yet again, did nothing at all, saying that the complaint would have to come from Lisa herself. They flat out ignored the part about the guns. This neighbor came to leave Portapique entirely, seeing that Gabriel was a real ticking time bomb. Yet again, the RCMP purged this complaint from their records. Another one of Gabriel's uncles, a man named Chris, said he had a horrible upbringing from a very dysfunctional family, and never sought help, and fell through the cracks. Fully admitting that he felt Gabriel was capable of killing someone, he felt that the most likely target would be either his parents or his girlfriend. In 2015, Gabriel even came to burn bridges with one of his uncles, one of the only people in his family that was supportive of him. The uncle had bought a home in Portapique across the street from Gabriel, which he lent to him and let him use. However, Gabriel refused to give the home back to him, despite already having a house of his own. He said that his reason for refusal was something about unpaid debts. He wouldn't give it back until he got the money that he felt he was owed. Gabriel had actually contributed a bit to the purchase of the home a few years back, along with multiple other family members, but he didn't own it. The uncle then sold the home to a woman named Lisa McCulley, who moved in. Gabriel decided that he would take the proceeds from the sale of the house himself, so the uncle was left with no choice but to take him to court over it. Gabriel, still interested in the police, went out to buy a more recently decommissioned police cruiser. He told the businessman selling the car that he was a retired officer himself who wanted to park the car in his yard to deter thieves. He didn't end up buying this car in particular, but he still wanted one. His neighbors said that he began to cosplay as a police officer, even engaging in some roleplay around the neighborhood from time to time as well. While people were confused, they felt he was just a guy with an eccentric hobby. It was preferable to drunken rage, at least. In the fall of 2019, Gabriel did settle on a police cruiser to buy, a 2017 Ford Taurus, at an auction. While it had been painted completely white and stripped of any police-related accessories at the time, Gabriel didn't intend to leave it that way. He began to decorate it as a police car as well as he could. It came to be so accurate that an actual RCMP officer who saw him working on it told him that he should never drive it on the street. If he did, that would constitute a crime, being that impersonating a police officer is illegal. Gabriel got the decals for the car through his usual shady means. He found a supplier who made them and got them printed without the owner's permission somehow. Many of the accessories and decals were paid for over PayPal, who found the transactions to be suspicious. They even flagged several of the payments between March 22nd and December 5th. Lisa, his girlfriend, said that he had gotten most of the gear throughout both Canada and the US. He traveled to the US about 15 times during this endeavor. When 2020 came around, COVID lockdowns began in Canada, as well as all over a good portion of the whole world. COVID hit Gabriel very hard. This was mainly because his business was affected very directly. It was deemed non-essential and forced to close for the time being. Not only that, but the COVID craze only deepened Gabriel's already existing paranoia. He was, by all reports, completely consumed by the pandemic and felt that he was probably going to die. He sunk into this hole for several weeks, slowly losing his mind even more than before. In this mental state, he started to feel that the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, would start controlling all of the money in the country. As a result, he decided to start withdrawing his money from the bank in large amounts over time. He also bragged that, while other Canadians wouldn't be ready for it, he was well armed and more than ready to take them on. In March of 2020, he was spotted liquidating his bank accounts and withdrawing a whopping $475,000 in cash at once. This was at a Brinks depot in Dartmouth, where he was recorded on the security cameras. He took the money in 4,750 $100 bills and loaded it all into the trunk of his car. Somehow, this enormous withdrawal in pure cash didn't raise any flags anywhere. It has been widely speculated that Gabriel's paranoia about money and the government and the possibility that Lisa would leave him led him to completely snap. The cracks had already been showing. When Lisa went to bed on April 17th, 2020, she had no idea that everything that happened over the years would soon lead to an explosive culmination. The next day, on April 18th, Gabriel and Lisa were celebrating their anniversary. They were at the cottage on Portapique that day, celebrating. Throughout the day, things seemed to have gone fairly well, or at least normal. However, that all came to an end just before 10 p.m. Gabriel and Lisa got into yet another argument, but this time something was very different. While it still isn't known exactly why, Gabriel flew into much more of a rage than usual. He lashed out on Lisa, beating her there on the spot. With Lisa in shock, Gabriel grabbed a can of gasoline and walked inside the cottage. He poured the liquid all over the home before setting it on fire. He walked back outside, grabbed Lisa, and forced her to walk with him to his nearby warehouse. There, he threw her into the back of his replica police cruiser, tying her up in the process. Pulling the car out, Gabriel then set fire to the warehouse as well. Somehow, Lisa was able to escape from the back of the car. She ran out into the woods, and unsure of what to do and afraid of being caught, she continued to hide there. Gabriel wasn't content to take his rage out on only Lisa. For reasons only known to him, he wanted to take his anger out on anyone and everyone around him. He took one of his guns and walked over to the home of Greg and Jamie Blair, who lived nearby. Greg was outside and noticed the gun in his hands. Jamie and their 2 young boys heard him shout, "What the fuck are you doing with a gun?" before a loud bang. Greg was killed only steps away from them at the front door. It's believed that Gabriel came after Greg first because he knew that he was both strong and owned guns himself, making him the only person in the area who might put up a fight. Jamie ran back into the house and grabbed the boys, ushering them down the hallway and into a bedroom. She called 911 immediately at 10:01 p.m., being the first person to alert the police to what was going on. She stood with her back against the bedroom door, trying to prevent anyone from coming inside while she talked to the police. The boys hid behind the bed, with nothing in their power to do but watch and wait. Gabriel made his way into their home and found where they were hiding. Failing to open the door, he pulled up his gun and shot multiple times through it. Jamie was killed instantly. Gabriel then tried to set fire to this house as well, but after a few unsuccessful attempts, he gave up and left. The 2 boys inside escaped and ran off towards the home of a neighbor, Lisa McCulley. Lisa McCulley was the woman who had bought the home that Gabriel and his uncle had previously fought over. Lisa McCulley had just put her own son and daughter to bed before noticing that something was up. She lived within view of Gabriel's warehouse and could see the flames flickering outside through the trees. She went outside to see that the flames were actually now even higher than the tree line. There was a man, seemingly an RCMP officer, next to his cruiser. She walked over to him to ask him what was going on. This man was, of course, Gabriel. As she walked towards him, he pulled up his gun and shot her. She died instantly. Shortly after, the McCulley kids who had been put to bed were awakened by the Blair boys who had run from their own home. All 4 of them gathered together and hid inside the house. They called 911 together, telling them what they knew as the operator tried to keep them calm. They were told to wait for someone to come rescue them. Given that they didn't know who the killer was, they were given a special password that real officers would give them upon arriving to their house. Still, it would be a good while before the police made their way out to the area. Gabriel made his way into the home of Don Madsen and Frank Galenchin and shot them on the spot. This was where a neighbor happened to spot him. This neighbor, identified only as PR, was driving by to see what all the commotion was after hearing a lot of noise. He and his wife spotted the fake police car parked in front of the Galenchin home where Gabriel had just finished his most recent killings in the spree. However, they found it odd that the car was empty and none of the lights were on. When they pulled up to the home, they saw the kitchen light up in a blaze of flames. Seeing some of the other homes on fire in the area, they knew that this was bad. Still, they were confused by what seemed to be an officer parked outside. They quickly drove back to their own home, but on the way they noticed that this supposed officer was now following them. Gabriel pulled up alongside their car and fired one of his handguns at them. The bullets hit PR twice, once in the shoulder and once in the forehead, missing his wife. Still, somehow, PR managed to drive away from the scene and live. Gabriel then made his way over to more of his neighbors' homes, one by one, continuing in his carnage. He walked into the home of Joy and Peter Bond, shooting and killing them on the spot. He then went over to a home where Corey Ellison was staying, murdering him as well. He then walked over to the home of Elizabeth Joanne Thomas and John Zoll and killed them both. He then made his way inside the home of Jolene Oliver, her boyfriend Aaron Tuck, and their 17-year-old daughter Emily, and massacred all of them. The first 3 RCMP officers arrived on scene at 10:26. They stopped their cars and slowly entered into the neighborhood on foot, coming across some of the victims right away. A few of them had managed to escape from their burning homes or while trying to rescue other victims and collapsed outside. One officer relayed back to headquarters, saying that they couldn't locate the shooter. Unsure of how to even describe what he was seeing, he told them it's very bad. Knowing the killer was still around, likely nearby, they called for backup. Other officers began to block off nearby roads as Gabriel lurked somewhere nearby. At around 10:35, a witness saw Gabriel sneak out of the area by taking a dirt road near a blueberry field. Being a non-paved, unmarked road, the police hadn't known to block it off. Some of the surviving neighbors were able to tell the police who had shot at them, giving them his name and the valuable information that he was wearing a police uniform and driving a police car. However, by now, Gabriel was long gone, and nobody knew where he had went or what he was planning. Gabriel had driven out to an industrial area in the town of Debert, about 26 kilometers from where the previous shootings had taken place. He made his way to a remote area behind a welding shop to park. There he ditched a bunch of police equipment and gun-related items into a ditch. At 11:32, the RCMP began their reaction to the killings, one that would be extremely controversial. Rather than tell the public what was happening or alert them that they were in danger, they left the local population completely in the dark of the real danger they were in. Instead, they only released a message on Twitter, and Twitter only, saying that they were dealing with a firearms complaint, and told people to stay inside with their doors locked. They issued no public alert, and for the next 8 hours wouldn't update the public at all, on Twitter or otherwise, while the killer was still at large in the area. To make things even worse, the police couldn't even agree on whether the shooter had already been apprehended or if he was driving a police car or not, leading to confusion amongst them. They couldn't even use their helicopter to help in the search as it was down for some maintenance at the time. Local residents said that they saw little to no law enforcement in the area that night, despite hearing the gunshots and fires themselves. It wasn't until 2 hours after Gabriel had escaped that the RCMP circulated even an internal message to police throughout Nova Scotia, telling them what had happened and giving them Gabriel's information. For now, Gabriel waited in his replica police cruiser, plotting his next move. It was now the next day, April 19th, and the sun was coming up. Gabriel was still on the run, and he wasn't anywhere near done with his murderous plans. At 5:43 a.m., he left the town of Debert and drove north on the highway towards the home of some people that he knew. He was now about 37 kilometers north of Portapique and ready to continue his rampage. Now at the home of Adam and Carol Fisher, he knocked on their door and rang the doorbell over and over again. Getting no response, he simply gave up and left the area without killing anyone. Luckily for them, he didn't force his way into their home like he had done with the others. Whether this was due to the daylight or some other reason, we will never know. Roughly 45 minutes later, he was caught on video entering the Wentworth area, now about 60 kilometers away from Portapique. There he drove out to a house on Hunter Road. He entered into the home of Alana Jenkins and Sean McLeod, shooting and killing them both. To add insult to injury, he killed the 2 dogs in the Jenkins-McLeod home as well before making himself at home. He would stay at that house for about 3 hours, with it still being completely unknown what he did throughout that time. It was around the time of those killings that Lisa Banfield, his girlfriend, found the courage in the daylight to leave the woods and find help. She ran to a neighbor's house to call for help, with Gabriel having destroyed her cell phone in the Rampage. She was barefoot, telling the neighbor that she had been in the woods all night, fearing for her life. She was able to give a photo of the fake police cruiser that Gabriel was using. With this information, the RCMP finally issued their second alert at around 8 a.m., almost 11 hours after the massacre had started, warning that Gabriel could be anywhere in the area of Nova Scotia by this point. At 8:45 a.m., Gabriel was finally publicly identified as the shooter. Tired of waiting at the home where he was hiding out, Gabriel set fire to it much like many of the others. On his way out, a neighbor noticed the flames and approached the house to help. Gabriel then turned the gun on this man, Tom Bagley, and murdered him as well. He got back into his car and left the scene. He started driving south on the highway this time, back towards Portapique. At 9:43, he was seen stopping along the highway. There, a woman named Lillian Hislop was walking. He pulled out his gun and shot her in broad daylight. He then took off once again. 5 minutes later, he made his way out to a house in the Glenholm area, knocking on the door. He tried to trick them by saying that he was a police officer who was involved in the manhunt. He even shouted his own name, saying, "Come out with your hands up." The people inside, knowing very well who he was, called 911. One of the residents grabbed his own shotgun in case he tried to enter. They said that they recognized Gabriel, that they knew him personally, and that they felt he was there to kill them. After they didn't answer the door, Gabriel gave up and left their home, possibly due to knowing that the man inside was armed with a gun of his own. They were lucky, as he still wasn't done. Gabriel then drove past a local campground in East, ending up driving through Debert. The police tweeted that people should avoid the highway that he was using, still not informing them to the scale of what was happening. It was now just after 10 a.m. in Debert. Pretending to be a police officer, Gabriel pulled over a car. The driver complied. Gabriel then walked up to her window and killed her. This was a woman named Kristen Beaton. Minutes later, he pulled over the car of Heather O'Brien, shooting her in the same manner. Gabriel was then seen on video passing through the town of Truro and heading towards Millbrook. For the very first time, 12 hours after the massacre started, the police tweeted the valuable information that the shooter was driving a replica police car and wearing a police uniform. Had they have released this information earlier, and somewhere more appropriate than Twitter, Kristen Beaton and Heather O'Brien might still be alive. To make things even worse, to an absurd degree, the police started shooting at random people. At the Onslow Belmont Fire Hall, which was being used as a shelter for the Portapique victims, 2 RCMP officers saw an emergency management officer show up and opened fire on him. The shots missed, hitting the walls inside the building, before they noticed that it wasn't their suspect. Despite almost killing the man, they shrugged it off and simply continued business as usual. They didn't even check on the other victims in the building to make sure they hadn't accidentally hit them. At 10:25 a.m., Gabriel was seen on footage stopping at the Millbrook fire station. He got out of his car, took off his jacket, and replaced it with a reflective vest. He then hopped back into the car and continued driving south on the highway, now through the town of Hilden. Soon after, he stopped at the Brookfield SO gas station. Roughly 15 to 20 minutes later, Gabriel noticed an RCMP constable named Chad Morrison parked at an intersection in Shubenacadie. Chad was waiting there to meet another officer, Heidi Stevenson. Gabriel pulled up close to Chad and shot into his car, injuring him. Chad fled down the street and took shelter at an abandoned paramedic station. He was later found there and taken to the hospital. The other officer, however, Heidi Stevenson, was still on her way to group up with Chad at their meeting point. On the way, Gabriel collided head-on with her car. Heidi got out of the car and fired at Gabriel. Unfortunately, she didn't hit him. He fired back, killing her on the spot. He then took her own service pistol and set both her and his replica police car on fire. It was then that another driver, a man named Joey Weber, pulled up to the scene to see if he could help the injured officer. Gabriel pulled up his gun and shot him as well. Then he stole his silver Ford Escape SUV and fled the scene. The police announced that he was now in a different vehicle at 11:06. Right at the time the announcement was issued, Gabriel had already made his way to the home of a woman he knew, that being Gina Goulet. He killed her on the spot, changed his clothes inside her house, and stole her Mazda before driving off once again. There was an issue, though. Her Mazda was pretty low on gas. 13 hours after the massacre began, Gabriel pulled into a gas station, the Irving Big Stop in Enfield, to refuel the car. By pure coincidence, a few RCMP tactical officers pulled into the same station a few moments later to refuel their own vehicle. They pulled up right next to Gabriel and recognized him immediately. One of the officers jumped out of his car and took aim at Gabriel, ordering him to come out. It was then that Gabriel rose up Heidi Stevenson's gun. However, this time it wasn't directed at the officer. It was directed at himself. He fired. However, this didn't kill him. As soon as he fired the gun, so did the other officers. They shot him twice in the head, twice in the neck, 7 times in the right arm and 1 in the left, and 25 more times in the torso. While Gabriel hadn't died by his own hand, he sure as hell was dead now. At 11:26, the massacre was finally over. The police finally confirmed Gabriel's death to the public at 11:40 a.m. According to his girlfriend, judging by the road he was on, Gabriel had been on his way to kill another person he knew before he was caught by pure coincidence. By the end, Gabriel had killed 22 people. He had officially committed the deadliest massacre in Canadian history. 13 had died in Portapique, 4 in Wentworth, 2 in Debert, and 3 in Shubenacadie. 2 others had been injured, and 2 dogs had been killed as well. It was a murder spree that spanned multiple towns in a 100-kilometer radius. And to make things worse, the public was largely unaware of it until toward the very end of it. According to an RCMP commissioner, a few of Gabriel's victims were actually connected to him. However, over time, most of the people he attacked were completely random. He had known one of the victims in Wentworth after going hunting with him, but it didn't appear that there was a grudge between them. Even when it did come to the people he knew, it seemed that, while he knew them, he still wasn't killing them for any particular reason. We will never know why things played out the way they did. The investigation started immediately as the attack ended. It was quickly found that, over time, Gabriel had actually come to own 4 police cruisers, not only the one used in the attack. 2 of them were burned up at his cottage in Portapique, and the other remaining car was at his property in Halifax. Within his home was what was only described as a shrine to the RCMP. In the destroyed home, they found a safe containing hundreds of thousands of dollars that he had liquidated. The police ended up with $705,000 in cash from his properties. This resulted in an audit being done on his finances. The Prime Minister that Gabriel had feared, Justin Trudeau, expressed his condolences after the attack. However, within one day, his entire focus turned to gun control. It was announced that the sale, importation, transportation, or usage of assault-style firearms would be banned immediately. Many guns were reclassified from restricted to prohibited. Owners were given a 2-year grace period to trash, export, or sell them under a buyback program. About 1,500 models were now classified as prohibited, mainly semi-automatics. Many within Canada were puzzled, with even experts weighing in. They argued that this gun ban wouldn't have prevented Gabriel from getting his weapons in the first place. After all, he already wasn't allowed to own them, and they had been smuggled into the country illegally, not purchased. They noted that the ban wouldn't do anything to address the main problem, which was that the guns were so easy to traffic across borders. Several different court cases began, with them stating that the government had overstepped and targeted legitimate gun owners unfairly. The families of the victims, as well as pretty much everybody, highly condemned the RCMP's response to the massacre, especially when it came to how little they did to warn the public, leading to many more deaths than there should have been. The CBC News analyzed the events, saying that they had observed, quote, a myriad of failures and shortcomings in the RCMP's actions. Criminologists called their response a mess, saying that a massive overhaul was needed when it came to the way that they dealt with mass shootings, noting that the trend of failure had grown pretty apparent over the last few years. Soon after, the RCMP started providing updates on the investigation online, offering condolences on their website. Shortly after the attacks, the signs on Gabriel's Denture clinic in Dartmouth were taken down. Obviously, the public no longer wanted the reminder. Several different GoFundMes and other fundraisers were set up for the victims' families. Sadly, at least one of them was fraudulent, with the guy who started it pocketing all of the money. Luckily, it was shut down right before he could do so. The RCMP boldly told Canadian citizens that they needed to be more diligent with these things. Given that gatherings were still restricted due to COVID at the time, many people were left without much to do beyond share their condolences online, whether on TV or social media. A makeshift memorial was demolished in Portapique, which made way for a more permanent one. To this day, no motivation has ever been established in the massacre. Many agree that it was likely the result of several factors in Gabriel's life, all leading to one final rage and paranoia-induced meltdown. The RCMP conducted what they call a psychological autopsy on him, which involved extensive interrogations and interviews of his friends, family, colleagues, and neighbors. They determined that he was an injustice collector, a term that basically defines someone who never lets go of grudges, no matter how petty, and desires some sort of revenge. Several other mass shooters, such as Eric Harris, have been given the same label. To make the RCMP look even worse, many have theorized with evidence that Gabriel may have been involved with them to some degree. Not only was he apparently a very big fan of the RCMP, he had always expressed an interest in being a police officer. Not only that, but a news magazine called Maclean's reported that the lack of investigation into Gabriel's massive bank withdrawals and various other evidence was not only very consistent with organized crime, but also fairly typical with confidential informants for the RCMP. The RCMP denied that they had any association with Gabriel at all. However, the RCMP operations manual itself allows them to lie to the public and even the government if it's to protect the identity of confidential informants. Lisa Banfield, Gabriel's girlfriend, decided to sue his estate, which was valued at more than $1.2 million in total. She said that she was the victim of assault and battery, which isn't up for doubt, and that she suffered from both physical and psychological harm as a result. She soon renounced her right to be the executor of his will. The victims' families have also filed a separate lawsuit against the estate themselves. However, Lisa Banfield was found to have not been completely innocent in the whole thing. It was found that she was one of the people who had been illegally smuggling, or at the very least transporting, the large quantities of ammunition to Gabriel that were used in the attack. Her brother, James Banfield, and her brother-in-law, Brian Brewster, were also charged in relation to the smuggling. The lawyer of the families of the victims, Robert Pineo, said that they were all relieved about the charges. He said, "They felt throughout that this was a major piece of the puzzle that was missing. Through circumstantial evidence and some information from the community, they have felt that there was some sort of involvement beyond the killer himself. So this information has helped put their minds at ease, to a point." Still, the police stated that none of them had any prior knowledge of the attack that was going to happen. Eventually, the charges were dismissed. The victims' families came to file another lawsuit as well, this time not against the estate, but against the RCMP and Nova Scotia themselves for their handling of the attacks. That lawsuit, it seems, is still underway. The RCMP announced that they would investigate the officers who fired off the shots in the fire hall in Onslow, the place where they shot the emergency worker. Of course, they concluded that the officers firing the shots were justified and swept the whole thing under the rug. Many other questions have been raised in recent years separate from the police handling. For one, why did the police time and time again ignore Gabriel's treatment towards his girlfriend? Why did they not care when it was reported that he was stockpiling weaponry on several occasions, which were very serious felonies? Why did they ignore that he clearly stated he wanted to kill a cop? Why was he able to withdraw hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash at once without even the slightest investigation into his banking activity, even if to only make sure that he wasn't being scammed? Why didn't the RCMP use Alert Ready, their existing warning system for emergencies like this that would have alerted everyone nearby on their phones? Why did they only vaguely post on Twitter, almost as if they were reluctant to tell the public that they were in danger? Why did they make posts on Twitter at all when the area of Portapique was known for having terrible cell reception? Why did they use Twitter in an area mainly comprised of senior citizens who wouldn't use it at all? The RCMP didn't have answers to those questions. On July 28, 2020, the federal public safety minister, Bill Blair, announced that a public inquiry would be held involving the RCMP's abysmal response that day. However, many weren't hopeful. It was unlikely that much would come from it. The inquiry didn't have the power to force people to testify, and the RCMP operations manual still allows the officers to lie, even in situations like this, to protect the identities of their informants. Later on, several court documents involving the case were finally unsealed. In some of the documents were police interviews with several witnesses that claimed that Gabriel had been a known drug smuggler who provided the people in Portapique and a nearby area called Economy with drugs that he smuggled in from Maine. They all knew that he had stockpiles of guns, fake walls in his houses with hidden storage areas, and hidden compartments all over his properties. These hidden compartments, at least, have been confirmed, giving some credit to their claims. Another witness said that he also owned grenades, and a lawyer indeed did find wooden grenade cases at the crime scene. Whether or not he was really smuggling drugs still isn't unknown for sure, but given that so many other details have been confirmed, including weapons smuggling, it doesn't seem to be that far-fetched of a claim. In January of 2022, Gabriel's Denture clinic was finally demolished for good. Now, at least the people aren't left with the grim visual reminder of everything that had happened that day. On March 30th, 2023, the Mass Casualty Commission finally released its final report on the massacre. The report was, to put it lightly, very critical of the RCMP. They lambasted them for failing to warn the public of the shooting, leading to many deaths, for failing to be prepared at all for such an attack, for their inflexibility in their operations, and how that they had never displayed any accountability in what had happened. The report listed 130 recommendations for systematic changes, and over half of them were targeted at the RCMP specifically. It was even urged that the public safety minister start an independent review of the force entirely. They also called for the Alert Ready system, which was privately owned, to be nationalized and overhauled to stop crimes like this from happening in the future. Not a whole lot of time has passed since then. Only time will tell if these recommendations lead to improvements, if they're even put into place at all. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. These days I've opened up a merch store. There you can get yourself some cool t-shirts and other stuff if you don't have clothes already. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. If you ever need to get a hold of me, or if the channel went down or anything, that's the best way to hear about it. I also really appreciate when people subscribe to my Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get most of the same benefits on there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.